Inauguration Countdown. We're 4 days away from the big day. We'll tell you who says they won't be there, plus the role of prayer in Friday's festivities. Insurance for everybody. President-elect Donald Trump talks about his plan to replace Obamacare, but doesn't reveal any details. We're at the Capitol with reaction. Peace in the Middle East. In our nightly report from Rome, Mary Shevlin explains the relationship between Palestinians and the Vatican. And paying tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King. A visit with his niece, Alveda King, a leader in the pro-life movement. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 16, 2017. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President-elect Donald Trump is calling on Americans to honor Martin Luther King Jr. for, quote, all of the many wonderful things that he stood for. Martin Luther King III met with Trump today in New York City. Trump may be trying to put behind him the controversy over his criticism of John Lewis, a black congressman and civil rights icon. Dr. King's son asked Americans to unite.
In the heat of emotion, a lot of things get said on both sides. And I think that at some point, I am, as John Lewis and many others are, a bridge builder. The goal is to bring America together and Americans.
Meanwhile, Representative Lewis gave a speech at an event honoring Dr. King in Miami. Lewis walked alongside MLK in 1965 to lead a voting rights march in Selma, Alabama. He was nearly beaten to death for his participation. Today he spoke of King's legacy.
It is the power of the way of peace, the way of love. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, hate is too heavy a burden to bear.
The Democrat from Georgia angered Trump by calling him an illegitimate president and said he would not attend the inauguration. At least 20 Democratic lawmakers have joined the boycott. Trump responded on Twitter that Lewis is all talk and said his Atlanta-based district is falling apart. With 4 days to go, the nation's capital prepares for Friday's presidential inauguration. Yesterday's dress rehearsal came complete with a marching band and people posing as the new president and vice president so everyone could mark their spots, including the media. Greg Lowry, a 53-year-old vocalist in the U.S. Army Band, said it was an honor to be the president's substitute. He even bought a new red tie for the assignment. As Trump prepares to take office, he says his plan to replace the nation's health care law will include insurance for everybody. The president-elect made the comment in an interview with the Washington Post published Sunday. Jason Calvi has more from the Capitol tonight. Jason?
Wyatt, thousands of people across the country rallied to slam the Obamacare repeal. The GOP took a crucial first step in that process late last week. The president-elect didn't give many details this weekend about what will replace Obamacare, but some Republicans are giving us a preview, and that repeal also is to include defunding Planned Parenthood.
We won't give up. We won't back down.
Planned Parenthood is promising a fight. If defunded, the Congressional Budget Office says the abortion provider would lose about $400 million Medicaid dollars. The first step of a repeal of Obamacare, including stripping Planned Parenthood of federal funds, came last week.
Obamacare is failing, and it's failing these people miserably. Their premiums have gone up an average in North Carolina 40%.
I say mend it, don't end it, because a lot of people are relying on it. I think 20 to 30 million Americans actually have their health care through the Affordable Care Act.
Dozens of rallies across the country this weekend were organized to oppose a repeal.
It's time we got our national priorities right. We cannot let that be abolished.
But Republicans promised to replace Obamacare with a better plan.
We will fight for patients with pre-existing conditions, children, parents, and people who need to be protected.
Our goal is to ensure the most amount of people give access to the most amount of people at the least amount of cost.
Obamacare's contraceptive mandate forces most employers to cover contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs. 15 dioceses and 40 religious charities sued. That's according to Beckett Law, which represents the cases of our network and the Little Sisters of the Poor.
The burden is the burden on our conscience of having to collaborate with something that we consider to be morally objectionable and evil.
One lawyer representing groups suing the Obama administration about the HHS mandate tells me the cases are on hold right now. He says the new HHS secretary could change the mandate to truly accommodate the concerns of groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor and our own network, or the new attorney general could settle all of the cases out of court. Wyatt?
Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Ahead of Trump's inauguration, confirmation hearings for his cabinet picks continue this week on the Capitol. Tomorrow, Interior Secretary nominee Ryan Zinke and Secretary of Education pick Betsy DeVos will be in the hot seat. On Wednesday, hearings take place for Trump's nominees for Commerce, Wilbur Ross, EPA, Scott Pruitt, Health and Human Services pick Tom Price, and the Ambassador to the UN, Governor Nikki Haley. And Thursday, Secretary of Energy nominee Rick Perry will answer questions from senators. Trump's pick for Education Secretary is a conservative Christian and advocate for school choice. Betsy DeVos' support for vouchers and alternatives to traditional public education have drawn criticism, and a civil rights group questions if her Christian beliefs will impact transgender policies in schools. Joining us now is Derek McCoy, the Executive Vice President at the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. So, Derek, your organization works with poor communities and especially with lawmakers to advocate for school choice. Why is school choice so important for these communities?
Well, why, quite frankly, school choice is absolutely essential for hard-hit communities and poor communities. First of all, the public school system is failing. It's failing our kids. It hasn't been doing well, and it's really on life support in many of our hard-hit communities. If I look at it just only miles away from D.C., one of the most affluent African-American, and even you probably have a good amount of Hispanics as well within that community, are really, but you have schools that are on the need to improve list. You have schools that parents can't even send their kids to those schools and expect that there's going to be a great return on investment.
So what do you think then will be the biggest change in the Department of Education if Betsy DeVos is in as compared to the current secretary?
Well, I think it's going to be a phenomenal opportunity because Betsy DeVos brings a whole new flavor to the Department of Education. If you look at Arnie Duncan, and then also John B. King, but really Arnie Duncan, who served the longest term of the Secretary of Education with this current administration. He's always talks about, hey, all we need to do is look at test scores and graduation rates, and then that's really going to be our metric. Well, I don't think so. I think really what we have to look at is what are the best opportunity for kids? What's the best opportunity for parents? Because money needs to follow those kids to various schools. It's not going to break down the school system that's currently there, but I think it's going to uplift, give choices, give variety. School kids learn in a variety of different ways. Technology has changed. Learning aspects have changed. Look at online school learning at kindergarten level for kids. Not only homeschooling, but in parochial schools and Catholic schools alike, which has served the community for a long time.
Well, noting all of that, what do you think are some of the biggest innovations that Betsy DeVos could bring? Because all we hear about really is just vouchers in the mainstream media.
And that's a small amount of what she's talking about. Really, what I like about her is she has a long-term history in really trying to go after hard-hit communities and say, what can we do to help them? I think the innovation side of things are going to be really there. I think she's also going to look at it, and she does bring a value system to I think, Department of Education, but I think she's going to look at what are the metrics that really work? How can we bring some qualified metrics to that? And I hear so many arguments about, well, school choice just takes away from the public school system, and I don't think that's true at all. I think what it looks like is that if she comes to her position and becomes the Secretary of Education, I think what we're going to find is that she's going to really bring a great deal of, like I said, insight, variety, skilled team members in the Department of Education that's going to really look at those programs and say what's going to best serve our kids.
Very good.
Kid focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Derek McCoy, Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The FBI has arrested the wife of the Orlando nightclub shooter. Sources say Nora Salman was taken into custody this morning in the San Francisco area. She's facing charges in Florida, including obstruction of justice. She moved to the San Francisco area after her husband, Omar Mateen, shot and killed 49 people at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando last year. Salman is due in court tomorrow. A shooting at a nightclub in a popular Mexican resort leaves 5 people dead. A lone gunman entered the club in Playa del Carmen and started a shootout with another person inside. Several of the dead are part of the security detail who tried to stop the shooting. At least 15 people were injured. Investigators do not believe the shooting is connected to terrorism. The resort has largely been spared the violence that has hit other parts of Mexico. 3 Boko Haram suicide bombers, including a 12-year-old child, exploded at a university in Nigeria, killing a professor and another child. 17 others were hurt. One blast ripped through a mosque where professors were saying prayers at dawn. Nigeria's 7-year-old Islamic uprising has killed more than 20,000 people. Pope Francis sends his condolences to victims and their families of a cargo plane crash in Kyrgyzstan. At least 37 people died, including residents of a small village where the plane went down. Footage from the scene shows the devastation of the crash. Half of the homes were destroyed. Investigators are still trying to determine the cause of the crash. The Holy Father welcomed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to the Vatican Saturday. According to the Holy See press office, the 2 leaders discussed the peace process in the Middle East. They hope for renewed peace talks. After the papal meeting, Abbas formally inaugurated the new Palestinian embassy near the Vatican. He said the embassy is a place of pride for Palestinians, and he hopes that all countries will recognize the state of Palestine, and that would help the peace process. The U.S. does not recognize the Palestinian territories as a state. For more on the talks, we go down to Mary Shevlin, our correspondent in Rome. Mary, President-elect Trump says he plans to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which has upset Palestinians. Has President Abbas commented on that?
He did. He said he had only heard the reports at that point from newspapers and various news reports, and he said that he hoped it wasn't true. He said this would do a lot to undermine the peace process, and they've made so much progress over the past few years. So he said, you know, we hope it's not true. We'll have to see what the incoming administration does.
Mary, what is the relationship in general like between Palestinians and the Vatican?
Well, as we saw today in the meeting with Pope Francis, the meeting today was very cordial and very friendly. So relations are very much on good footing, and they've developed over the past decades to become what they are today. And we see that in the very opening of the embassy itself, which took place on Saturday afternoon. It's the for Palestine. The Vatican has recognized their statehood, and now they have an embassy. So a lot of great progress has been made, and Pope Francis is sure hoping this will continue in order to foster peace in that region.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about peace. Mary, what has been the Pope's main concerns when he's discussing peace in the Middle East?
First of all, the people who live there, whether they be Christian, Muslims, or Jews, he wants peace in the Middle East and in Jerusalem and in Israel. So I think that's first and foremost. But obviously there's the holy sites to consider. This is the birthplace of Christianity. So much of what Christ did during his life on earth took place right there, and all of our shrines dedicated to memorializing those are there. So I think preserving those holy sites, fostering peace, brotherhood, so that all the faiths that trace their roots back to Abraham in the Old Testament, as do Jews, Muslims, and Christians, can live in that holy city, in the Holy Land, as brothers in peace.
Well, we know how important the Vatican has played in brokering peace talks in the past. It's nice to hear about how they're continuing to put those efforts forward. Mary Shevlin, our Rome correspondent. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
People in the UK are waiting for a major speech tomorrow by British Prime Minister Theresa May. She's expected to outline her plans to leave the European Union. Brits remain divided on the issue.
Theresa May now needs to sort of get her finger on the button and make sure that everything is in place. So by the end of this financial year, she's in a position to make things happen.
I feel like we should be heading towards a more more cooperation, generally speaking, and this feels like a very retrograde step.
Options include a hard Brexit with no access to the single market and a soft Brexit with continued access. Coming up, Oath of Office, how Ronald Reagan's Bible will shine in the spotlight at Friday's inauguration. And it's the end of an era for an American institution. Why the Ringling Brothers Circus is calling it quits. The Reagan Family Bible will make an appearance at Friday's inauguration. Vice President-elect Mike Pence will be the first official to use it since Reagan. Justice Clarence Thomas will swear in Pence. Chief Justice John Roberts will administer the oath to President-elect Donald Trump. Both judges are Catholic. Throughout U.S. history, religious symbols have played a role in public ceremonies. Joining us now is Chad Pecknold, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America. So, Chad, as you just heard, Mike Pence will take the oath of office at least with Ronald Reagan's Family Bible in hand. How important are religious symbols in general?
Well, of course, they remind us that the country was founded on religious principles of freedom, that we are a people that's ordered to God. And every session of Congress begins with prayer. And when office holders put their hand on the Bible, they, in a sense, recognize that they need God's help.
Yeah, it's like I said, oath is a big deal. Most people don't even realize how important that word oath is. You know, Trump is having 6 religious leaders participate in the inauguration, more than any other president has had. The groups also represent different faiths. What role and how important do religious leaders participate in an event like this? What do you think that says, and what does that sort of symbolize?
Well, again, I think like the putting your hand on the Bible, which not every president has done, but most presidents have done, there's the recognition in all of those visuals that, in a sense, America is a country that recognizes God and recognizes God in prayer. Now, of course, they're not all Catholics. Only Cardinal Dolan will be up there praying for the president and his administration as a Catholic. But in a sense, they're all united in the sense that they see that America needs God, and clearly we do.
And obviously having Cardinal Dolan there still says a lot about the role of Catholicism in America.
It does.
You know, it was interesting. We were talking about how you had this Twitter seminar talking about St. Augustine's City of God, and that became so popular it almost blew up there on Twitter. Yeah. You know, as we go through this presidential transition with so many people expressing anger or frustration, what do you think we can learn about from St. Augustine on this?
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's actually a connection between the scripture that Mike Pence is using. 2 Chronicles 7:14 is about being humble. And this is what the City of God is about too, that if a people will humble themselves and look towards God, that this will be good for the country. And in a sense, Mike Pence is signaling that. Augustine is telling us that. At the beginning of the Western political order, we have a man who stands up and says, what's best for a civil society is to turn to God.
Fascinating stuff. Chad Pecknold, Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University of America. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
After 146 years, Ringling Brothers and Barnum & Bailey Circus is shutting down. The owner of the iconic roadshow cites falling ticket sales, high operating costs, and ongoing battles with animal rights groups. It's the end of the road for the greatest show on earth. In just 4 months, the curtain falls on the one and only Ringling Brothers Barnum & Bailey Circus, which defined the circus experience for generations. Organizers say its fate was likely sealed last year when they retired the popular elephant show.
Removing the elephants from the touring units, we saw a very sharp drop in attendance, much greater than we anticipated, and that's led us to this decision because the business model was no longer sustainable.
For years, the elephants and their dance routines were a big draw for circus fans, but not at all popular with animal rights groups, which deplored their treatment and sued the company. Last year, Ringling Brothers retired the elephants to a conservation center in Florida. After the announcement, people for the ethical treatment of animals declared victory, but they admit it's still war against other wild animal exhibitors. The last performance will be May 21st in Uniondale, New York. Ringling Brothers was founded in Wisconsin in 1884. The current American economy has been hard on young people. A new study shows millennials are not earning as much as their baby boomer parents. Mark Irons reports.
Andrea Ledesma has a 4-year college degree, but couldn't find a job in her field. Instead, she works 30 hours a week making pizzas.
You think you're going to graduate and all these things are just going to happen for you, and when nothing happens, you're like, well, what was this for? I just spent all this time and money, so much money.
The 28-year-old is not alone. A new study done by the advocacy group Young Invincibles confirms what many millennials suspected. They are worse off than their baby boomer parents.
We know the Great Recession has had a big impact on millennials. We also wanted to look at decades-long trend in the economy and in financial security to see what we were facing compared to, for example, what our parents saw when they were our age. The median net worth for young people dropped by half. So young people today have half the median net worth as young people did in the 1980s.
Wages have also dropped 20%. And median household income is down $10,000 from generation to generation. Fewer millennials also own property.
Overall, we see a decline in home ownership from the 1980s, young people in the 80s, to today by about 8%.
That includes Heather Baker and husband David Marock, who are stuck with $70,000 in student loans. High child care costs caused Baker to stop working over a year ago. And with Marock's $50,000 a year income, they needed to move in with his parents to save up for a house.
For me, it wasn't appealing to pay a premium mortgage insurance, pay a bunch of interest on a house that may not be worth that if the market were to crash again, or may not be worth that in the long run if you were to sell it.
The American dream now, I think, we're just striving to be happy, just know what happiness is, and making our life fit us instead of making ourselves fit what's going on in the world, I guess.
Ledesma's mother can see that her generation had it easy.
I think everything is just harder for them, whether it's the economy and it's politics and just the, drugs out there.
When Ledesma was younger, she thought at this point she'd have a house and be making more money.
That's not something that people strive for, and that's not something that's even attainable.
Millennials living with the reality of a new kind of economy. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
President Obama welcomes the World Series champion Chicago Cubs to the White House.
Here is something none of my predecessors ever got a chance to say. Welcome to the White House, the World Series champion, Chicago Cubs.
The president is a White Sox fan, but rooted for the Cubs after the Sox failed to reach the playoffs. In November, the Cubs won their first World Series title since 1908. Up next, March for Life. People in the Windy City hold their own rally just 2 weeks before the national event in D.C. And Martin Luther King's legacy. On this holiday, we profile his niece and her work to defend the unborn. Men, women, and children helped lay a wreath in Washington to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Vice President-elect Mike Pence joined the group and met with the crowd. The civil rights icon would have been 88 years old. Washington's March for Life is 11 days away, but pro-life supporters gathered in Chicago yesterday for that city's march. Pro-lifers packed into Federal Plaza in Chicago yesterday afternoon. Organizers say the goal is to be a visual and vocal reminder the people of Chicago and the Midwest stand for life. Chicago Cardinal Blaise Supich participated in the annual event. Pope Francis issues a stern warning about the dangers of gossip. He spoke at a parish on the outskirts of Rome where he traveled to celebrate Mass on Sunday.
Volete una parrocchia perfetta? Niente chiacchiere.
The Holy Father says if you want a perfect parish, then avoid gossip and talk to the person directly, or even the parish priest, but don't gossip amongst yourselves. His comments come as he resumes his parish visits in the Diocese of Rome. Also this weekend, Pope Francis baptizes 13 babies from areas devastated by earthquakes that struck central Italy last year. The Holy Father saying the cross is a sign of our victory. The baptisms took place in the chapel of the Santa Marta house where the Pope lives. The youngest of the newborns was just 5 days old. Finally, tonight on this Martin Luther King Day, we profile his niece and her pro-life mission. Jason Calvi caught up with Alveda King early one morning in 2015.
Alveda King is a busy woman.
Good morning to you. How are you?
Her father and slain uncle, the leader of the civil rights movement, were deeply rooted in their Christian faith.
They would say, certainly, according to Romans 13, obey the laws of the land. But you must always obey God, even more than you obey humans.
King is director of African American outreach for Priests for Life.
Okay, so send that to Newswire, and then do the whole thing on our blog and to our list.
The organization says they're being forced to violate their faith with the HHS birth control mandate.
Good morning. Good to see you. God bless.
They say the opt-out form triggers birth control coverage for their employees, so they're suing.
I have suffered abortions and harmful effects from contraceptives. So that's why I say my rights as a woman to force something on my company and me by participating one way or the other. Even if we signed a waiver that says we don't participate, that's still participating.
The 65-year-old mother of 6 had 2 abortions, but is now a leader in the pro-life movement.
Remain prayerful, keep looking up. God will have the final word in this matter.
In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Jason, and happy Martin Luther King Day to you. For all the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Good night, and God bless.